6 months later, Tommy stood on the bridge of the Council flagship Harmony, watching through the main viewport as a sleek, organic-looking vessel approached through the void. The ship's design was unlike anything in the Council fleet, all flowing curves and bioluminescent panels that pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat. It was the first Vorthak vessel to approach a Council ship without weapons, charged in over 70 years. "Contact established," announced Captain Yeleth of the Aquarian Maritime Guild, her tentacles dancing over the communication controls. "They're requesting permission to come aboard." Tommy felt his stomach flutter with nervous excitement. The months since his breakthrough with Korthai had been a whirlwind of political negotiations, cultural exchanges, and careful diplomatic preparations. The Galactic Council had ultimately voted to reclassify the Vorthaks from hostile species to potential allies, but not without fierce debate and significant opposition. Admiral Thexara, now serving as the official liaison for the peace talks, placed a reassuring hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Ready for this, young ambassador?" The title still felt strange. Tommy had been officially appointed as Special Cultural Advisor for Human Vorthak Relations, the youngest individual ever to hold a council diplomatic position. The decision had been controversial, but Korthai had made it clear that the Vorthaks would only negotiate with Tommy present. "As ready as I'll ever be," Tommy replied, adjusting the translation device that had been specially calibrated to handle Vorthak harmonics. The docking process took nearly an hour. Vorthak ships operated on completely different principles than Council vessels, using biological systems that required careful interfacing with mechanical docking ports. Tommy watched through the observation windows as massive figures moved gracefully through the alien ship's corridors, preparing for a meeting that would determine the fate of both species. When the airlock finally opened, Tommy's breath caught. 3 Vorthaks emerged, their obsidian scales gleaming under the ship's lights. The leader was even larger than Korthai, with intricate scarring on its hide that suggested great age and experience. The other 2 were clearly younger, their movements more energetic and their scales showing the subtle color. Variations that Tommy had learned indicated different emotional states, but what struck him most was how different they seemed from the desperate, dying creature he had first encountered. These Vorthaks moved with confidence and dignity, their amber eyes alert and intelligent. They were no longer refugees hiding in the shadows. They were representatives of a proud civilization, ready to take their place in the galactic community. The lead Vorthak approached Tommy and performed the respectful crouch that had become the standard Vorthak greeting for diplomatic encounters. When it spoke, the translation device rendered its harmonious vocalizations into slightly mechanical but understandable words. "Young speaker Tommy Chen, I am Elder Vashitar of the Deep Current clan. Our people sing songs of gratitude for your courage and wisdom." Tommy performed his own version of the Vorthak greeting, a slight bow that conveyed respect without the submission implied by the full crouch. "Elder Vashitar, it's an honor to meet you. Korthai sends greetings from Kepler Station." The Elder's eyes brightened at the mention of Korthai, who had chosen to remain on the research station as a permanent cultural liaison. The decision had surprised many, but Tommy understood. Korthai had found purpose in bridging the gap between species just as Tommy had. "How fares our young friend?" Elder Vashtar asked. "Well," Tommy replied with a smile. "The station's research teams are learning more about Vorthak culture every day, and Korthai seems to enjoy teaching them. It's also been working on some kind of artistic project, something about preserving the memory songs of the scattered clans." The Elder made a sound that the translator rendered as thoughtful humming. "The memory keeper's duty. It is good that the old ways survive even in these strange circumstances." Admiral Thexara stepped forward. "Elder Vashitar, the Council is honored by your presence. Shall we proceed to the formal negotiations?" But the Elder's attention remained focused on Tommy. "First, young speaker, there is something my people wish you to understand." The 2 younger Vorthaks moved forward, carrying between them an object that made Tommy gasp. It was a perfect replica of the geometric puzzle pieces from Korthai's enclosure, but scaled up to human size and crafted from what looked like living crystal that pulsed with soft, multicolored light. "This is a memory stone," Elder Vashitar explained. "It contains the accumulated knowledge and history of our people, star charts, cultural records, technological achievements, and most importantly, the true story of our encounters with the Council species." Tommy accepted the artifact with trembling hands. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Why are you giving this to me?" he asked. "Because you saw us as people when others saw only monsters," Elder Vashtar replied. "Because you trusted us when trust seemed impossible. And because your species understands something that others have forgotten, that survival is not about being the strongest or the most advanced. It is about being adaptable, empathetic, and willing to see beyond appearances." The elder gestured toward the observation windows, where Earth was visible as a small blue dot in the distance. "Your world is a death world like ours. Your people learned to coexist with predators just as ours did. Perhaps that is why you could understand us when others could not." Admiral Thexara watched the exchange with growing realization. "You're not just offering an alliance with the Council. You're offering a specific partnership with humanity." Elder Vashatar's harmonious voice carried notes of approval. "The young speaker's people have shown us that it is possible to be both predator and protector, dangerous and compassionate. These are qualities the galaxy needs as it faces the challenges ahead." "What challenges?" Tommy asked, though something in the elder's tone made him suspect he didn't want to know the answer. The elder's scales shifted to darker hues, a sign of serious concern that Tommy had learned to recognize. "The galaxy is larger than the Council believes, young speaker. There are threats moving in the deep void, ancient hungers that make our people's reputation seem gentle by comparison. The scattered clans have seen them, felt their approach. The time is coming when all species must stand together or fall separately." The revelation hung in the air like a physical weight. Tommy looked at the memory stone in his hands. Understanding that it contained more than just Vorthak history, it held warnings about dangers the Council hadn't even imagined. "That's why you're really here," he said quietly. "Not just for peace, but to warn us, and to offer partnership in facing what comes," Elder Vashtar confirmed. "Your people and ours have both survived by adapting to impossible odds. Together we might survive what no species could face alone." As the formal negotiations began in the ship's diplomatic chamber, Tommy found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a sick alien in a cage and a 12-year-old boy who couldn't stand to watch a living being suffer. It had become something none of them could have imagined. Humans were no longer the newest and most primitive species in the Council. They had become the bridge between civilizations, the translators of hope in a galaxy that had forgotten how to see beyond fear. And somewhere in the deep void, ancient threats were stirring, unaware that their arrival would be met not by scattered, suspicious species, but by an alliance forged in understanding and tempered by trust. The boy who had been warned not to feed the alien dragon had instead learned to speak its language. And in doing so, he had given both species something infinitely more valuable than safety. He had given them a future. The preparation for first contact took 3 days. Tommy spent the time learning everything he could about Vorthak physiology, studying the creature's behavioral patterns, and working with the station's linguists to develop basic communication protocols. The safety measures were extensive: force field generators, emergency containment systems, and a full medical team standing by. But as Tommy stood outside the containment bay on the morning of the attempt, wearing a specially designed protective suit that felt bulky and restrictive, all the preparation seemed inadequate. He was about to enter an enclosed space with a creature that could kill him in seconds. "Remember," Dr. Vextai said for the 10th time, "any sign of aggressive behavior and we activate immediate extraction. The force field will protect you, but only if you stay within the designated safe zone." Tommy nodded, though his attention was focused on the Vorthak. The creature stood in the center of its enclosure, motionless except for its amber eyes tracking Tommy's movements through the viewing window. It had been waiting like this for over an hour, as if it understood what was about to happen. "Tommy," his mother's voice came through the comm system in his helmet. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "No," Tommy replied quietly. "This is the right way. It chose me for a reason." Admiral Thexara's voice joined the conversation. "Human child, you may proceed when ready. Remember that the success or failure of this attempt may determine the future of human council relations." No pressure at all, Tommy thought wryly. He activated the containment bay's entry system and stepped through the airlock. The moment he entered the enclosure, everything changed. The Vorthak's posture shifted subtly, its head tilting in what Tommy had learned to recognize as curiosity rather than aggression. More remarkably, it made a soft, almost musical sound that was clearly a greeting. "Hello," Tommy said, his voice slightly muffled by the helmet but carried clearly by the suit's external speakers. The Vorthak approached slowly, its massive form moving with liquid grace. When it reached the edge of the safe zone marked by nearly invisible force field projectors, it stopped and lowered itself into the respectful crouch Tommy had seen before. Then it began to speak. The sounds were unlike anything in Tommy's experience. Complex modulations that seemed to incorporate multiple tones simultaneously, creating harmonies that were both alien and strangely beautiful. The creature's vocalizations lasted for several minutes, with clear patterns and rhythms that suggested sophisticated linguistic structure. When it finished, the Vorthak looked at Tommy expectantly. I don't understand yet, Tommy admitted, but I'm listening. Keep trying. The creature's amber eyes seemed to brighten with what might have been approval. It rose gracefully and moved to the star map it had created with the geometric shapes. Pointing to specific configurations, it repeated certain vocal patterns, clearly trying to establish connections between the visual symbols and its language. Tommy watched intently, beginning to grasp the creature's teaching method. It was using the star map as a reference point, associating specific sounds with stellar configurations that both species might recognize. Are you telling me about your home? Tommy asked. The Vorthak paused, then repeated one of its harmonic sequences while pointing emphatically at a cluster of shapes, representing what looked like a triple star system. Home, Tommy said, pointing to the same configuration. Your home. The creature made an excited sound and began a new sequence of vocalizations, this time incorporating gestures and movements that suggested narrative structure. It was telling a story. Over the next hour, using the star map as a foundation and gradually building a vocabulary of shared concepts, Tommy began to piece together fragments of what the Vorthak was trying to communicate. The story was complex and heartbreaking. The creature pointed to itself and made a specific sound that Tommy interpreted as its name, something like Korth High. It then indicated multiple positions on the star map while making different vocal patterns, suggesting other individuals, other Vorthaks. But as the narrative progressed, Korth High's gestures became more agitated. It began removing shapes from certain star positions, its vocalizations taking on tones that conveyed unmistakable distress. When it reached certain parts of the story, the massive creature's voice cracked with what could only be described as grief. Something happened to your people, Tommy said softly. Korth High looked up sharply, amber eyes focusing on Tommy with startling intensity. Then it began a new sequence of gestures, this time incorporating movements that Tommy recognized as representations of spacecraft and weapons. The story that emerged was devastating. Korth High's people hadn't been mindless predators. They had been a nomadic species, traveling between star systems in great family groups, following migration patterns that spanned generations. They had avoided contact with other species not out of hostility, but out of caution. But as the Galactic Council expanded its territory, encounters became inevitable. And every encounter had ended in violence. They thought you were monsters, Tommy whispered, understanding flooding through him. But you were just trying to protect your families. Korth High's response was a long, mournful vocalization that needed no translation. It was the sound of loss beyond measure. The creature continued its story, showing how the survivors had been scattered, hunted, driven to increasingly desperate measures for survival. The attacks on council ships and colonies hadn't been aggression. They had been the actions of a species fighting for its very existence. You're not a predator, Tommy said, the pieces falling into place. You're a refugee. Through the comm system, Tommy could hear stunned silence from the observation deck. The implications of what Korth High was revealing would shatter decades of council policy and military doctrine. But the story wasn't finished. Korth High began a new sequence of vocalizations, this time incorporating gestures toward Tommy in the observation window. Its tone changed, becoming more hopeful. As Tommy listened, he realized that Korth High wasn't just telling him about the past. It was making a proposal for the future. The Vorthak had been observing the station's operations for weeks, learning about human behavior and council politics. It had identified Tommy as someone who might understand and advocate for its people, and it was offering something extraordinary. In return for that advocacy, Korth High moved to another section of its star map and began indicating positions that Tommy gradually recognized as strategic locations throughout Council space. The creature was offering intelligence about other survivors, about Vorthak technology and capabilities, about everything the Council would need to establish peaceful relations. But more than that, it was offering partnership. The scattered Vorthak survivors possessed knowledge of deep space phenomena, navigation techniques, and survival strategies that could benefit the entire galactic community. They didn't want to be enemies, they wanted to be allies. "You're asking me to speak for you," Tommy said, understanding the magnitude of what was being requested. Korthai nodded, a surprisingly human gesture that must have been learned through observation. Then it approached the force field barrier and once again pressed its hand against the energy field, directly opposite Tommy's palm. The gesture that had begun as a recognition of shared intelligence had become something deeper, a bond of trust between species, mediated by a 12-year-old boy who had been brave enough to see a person where others saw only a monster. As Tommy pressed his hand against the field, matching Korthai's gesture, he felt the weight of two species' futures resting on his shoulders. He was no longer just a child trying to help a sick animal. He had become humanity's first ambassador to an entire civilization. And somewhere in the depths of space, other Vorthaks were waiting to learn whether the galaxy was ready to accept them as they truly were. Not monsters, but people desperate to come home. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of receiving Admiral Thexera's report about the Vorthak's voluntary communication attempt. Representatives from 47 species gathered via quantum communication link, their holographic forms filling the station's largest conference room with a cacophony of different atmospheres, gravities, and environmental requirements. Tommy sat between his parents at a small table facing the assembled representatives, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. The metal object the Vorthak had given him sat in front of him, its carved equations now translated and verified by the station's best mathematicians. The creature had demonstrated understanding of advanced physics, including principles that some Council species had only recently discovered. More disturbing for many representatives, it had shown knowledge of starship engineering and what appeared to be theoretical weapon designs. "The implications are clear," announced Councillor Vashteen of the Hegemony Coalition, her insectoid features stern and unforgiving. "This creature possesses detailed knowledge of our technologies and capabilities. It represents an intelligence-gathering threat of the highest magnitude." "You're missing the point," Tommy said, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure but his conviction unwavering. "It's not trying to gather intelligence. It's trying to share knowledge." Councillor Zethmar of the Crystalline Confederation sparkled with agitation, a human child presumptuous enough to interpret the motivations of a Class X predator. "This entire situation demonstrates the folly of including such a primitive species in advanced research." Tommy felt heat rise in his cheeks. But before he could respond, Admiral Thexera's voice cut through the chamber with quiet authority. "Councillor Zethmar, that primitive species has accomplished what 47 of our best xenobiologists could not. Perhaps it would be wise to listen to their insights rather than dismissing them based on prejudice." The crystalline being's faceted form flickered with what Tommy had learned was embarrassment, but Councillor Vashteen pressed the attack. "Admiral, with respect, the boy's success in identifying Vorthak intelligence does not qualify him to interpret their strategic intentions. We must consider the possibility that this creature's communication attempt is a form of psychological warfare." Dr. Marcus Chen leaned forward. "Councillors, my son has spent more time observing this individual Vorthak than anyone in recorded history. His insights have proven accurate at every turn. Perhaps we should consider that his understanding of the creature's motivations might be more reliable than our assumptions. Assumptions based on centuries of experience with Vorthak aggression," Councillor Vashteen countered. "These creatures have destroyed entire colonies, wiped out survey teams, and resisted every attempt at peaceful contact." Tommy stood up, his chair scraping against the floor in the sudden silence that followed. Every holographic eye sensor and perception organ in the room focused on him. "Have you ever actually tried peaceful contact?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Councillor Zethmar's crystalline form blazed with indignation. "Child Vorthak's attack on sight. They show no interest in communication or diplomacy." "Maybe because you've been treating them like monsters instead of people," Tommy replied, his voice growing stronger. Every encounter you've described sounds like humans. I mean like council forces. Going into Vorthak territory with weapons and defensive systems active. How would you react if armed strangers showed up in your home? The boy makes a valid point, came an unexpected voice from the back of the chamber. Counselor Threndak of the Mystic Orders, an ancient being whose species rarely participated in council debates, floated forward slightly. Our historical records indicate that first contact protocols with Vorthaks have always assumed hostile intent, because they demonstrate hostile behavior. Counselor Vashteen's mandibles clicked with frustration. Do they? Tommy challenged. Or do they demonstrate defensive behavior? There's a difference. He gestured toward the viewing screen that showed the Vorthak in its enclosure, now peacefully engaging with the puzzle objects and fish. Look at how it behaves when it's not threatened. It's curious, creative, even playful. It only showed aggression when it was captured and caged. Admiral Thexara studied the behavioral data on her personal display. The boy's observation aligns with our recent behavioral analysis. The specimen has shown no aggressive tendencies since environmental enrichment was implemented. Environmental enrichment implemented by a human child, Counselor Zethmar pointed out acidly. Perhaps there is something about human psychology that resonates with these creatures. After all, both species evolved on death worlds characterized by extreme predation. The comment was intended as an insult, but Tommy seized on it eagerly. Exactly. Humans understand predators because we lived with them. We learned to coexist with dangerous species instead of just trying to destroy them. An interesting perspective, Counselor Threndak mused, and one that suggests a possible path forward. You cannot be seriously considering negotiations with Vorthaks based on the theories of a human child, Counselor Vashateen protested, but Counselor Threndak's ancient voice carried weight that silenced the chamber. The child has demonstrated results where our conventional approaches have failed. Perhaps it is time to consider unconventional solutions. Tommy felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Everything he said next could determine not just the fate of the Vorthak in the containment bay, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. I want to try direct communication, he said simply. The chamber erupted in protests, objections, and what sounded like several different species equivalents of shocked laughter. Tommy waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The Vorthak already demonstrated that it recognizes me as an individual. It specifically sought me out to deliver its message. It's been responding to my presence differently than to the other researchers. I think it wants to communicate, but it needs to trust the person it's talking to. Absolutely not, Dr. Sarachen said immediately. Tommy, the risks are manageable, Admiral Thexara interrupted thoughtfully. With proper safety protocols and monitoring systems. Admiral. Multiple counselors protested simultaneously. The conventional approaches have failed, the Admiral continued, her golden eyes fixed on Tommy. The creature is dying in captivity. Our research has stalled, and we're no closer to understanding Vorthak psychology than we were 50 years ago. Perhaps it is time to try something different. Counselor Threndak's voice resonated with ancient authority. I support this proposal, but with conditions. The chamber fell silent, waiting. The communication attempt will be conducted under strict safety protocols. Multiple backup containment systems will be active, and if the human child can establish meaningful communication with the Vorthak, the Council will commit to reassessing our classification of the species. And if he fails? Counselor Vashteen demanded. Then we proceed with existing protocols, the ancient being replied solemnly. Tommy understood the subtext. If he failed, the Vorthak would be terminated as originally planned, and the species would remain classified as a hostile threat. But if he succeeded, I accept the conditions, Tommy said, before his parents could object. As the council session devolved into heated debates about protocols and safety measures, Tommy stared through the viewing screen at the Vorthak. The creature was arranging geometric shapes in what looked like a star map, its movements patient and deliberate. It looked up suddenly, amber eyes meeting Tommy's through the reinforced glass. For a moment, boy and alien predator regarded each other across the impossible divide of species, evolution, and fear. Then the Vorthak did something that sent chills down Tommy's spine. It pointed to the star map it had created, then to itself, and finally to Tommy. The message was unmistakable. It was showing Tommy where it came from, and it was ready to tell him its story. The only question was whether Tommy was brave enough to listen. News of the Vorthax transformation spread through the galactic community like wildfire. Within days, Kepler Station was receiving urgent communications from the Galactic Council, xenobiology institutes across known space, and even military commands that had been developing anti-Vorthak weapons. Tommy found himself at the center of a political storm he didn't fully understand. His daily observation sessions with the Vorthak had become formal research periods attended by rotating groups of scientists, military advisors, and council representatives. Each group brought their own agenda and their own interpretation of what Tommy had discovered. The Vorthak, meanwhile, continued to display increasingly sophisticated behaviors. It had learned to manipulate the feeding system controls, choosing not just when to eat but creating complex meal combinations from the available options. More remarkably, it had begun to create art. Using its acidic saliva in carefully controlled amounts, the creature had started etching intricate patterns into the metal walls of its enclosure. The designs were mathematically precise, incorporating geometric principles that suggested an understanding of advanced mathematics. Some patterns resembled star charts, others looked like molecular diagrams, and a few appeared to be pictographic representations of concepts the research team couldn't identify. "It's trying to communicate," Tommy insisted during one of the daily briefings. "These aren't random patterns. It's showing us what it knows." Dr. Zefkol, who had become increasingly hostile as the evidence of Vorthak intelligence mounted, waved dismissively with one gray hand. "The boy projects human characteristics onto random behavior patterns. This is why children should not be involved in serious scientific research." Admiral Thexera, who had been studying the latest behavioral reports, looked up sharply. "Dr. Zefkol, are you suggesting that mathematical star charts are random behavior patterns?" The gray alien's large black eyes flickered with what Tommy had learned to recognize as discomfort. "Admiral, with respect, we cannot assume these markings represent mathematical understanding. Many species create patterns that appear mathematical without possessing true mathematical reasoning. The boy's theory has proven correct in every particular thus far," the Admiral replied coolly. Perhaps it would be wise to consider his interpretations more seriously. Tommy felt a surge of gratitude toward the reptilian commander, but he also noticed the growing tension among the research staff. His success with the Vorthak was creating political problems he hadn't anticipated. Later that day, as Tommy sat in his usual spot at the viewing window, his mother joined him with a troubled expression. "Tommy, we need to talk about what's happening here." "What do you mean?" Dr. Sarah Chen settled beside her son, choosing her words carefully. "Your discovery about Vorthak intelligence is creating complications beyond the scientific community. If these creatures are truly sentient beings rather than mindless predators, it changes everything about how the galaxy classifies and treats them." Tommy looked puzzled. "Isn't that good? I mean, if they're intelligent, shouldn't we be trying to communicate with them instead of just studying them?" "It should be good," his mother agreed. "But there are political implications. For decades, several council species have been advocating for the complete extermination of Vorthax. They've been classified as an existential threat to galactic civilization. If that classification changes, the people who wanted to kill them all would look pretty bad," Tommy finished, beginning to understand. "Worse than bad. Some species have built their entire military philosophy around being the protectors of the galaxy from Vorthak threats. Others have developed weapons specifically designed to wipe out Vorthak homeworlds. If these creatures are revealed to be intelligent beings, those species could face accusations of attempted genocide." The weight of this revelation settled on Tommy like a heavy blanket. He'd thought he was just trying to help a sick animal. He hadn't realized he was potentially rewriting galactic law and challenging the fundamental beliefs of entire civilizations. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Before his mother could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and the automated voice system began repeating a message in multiple languages. "Containment breach in Bay 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Tommy's blood went cold. Bay 7 was the Vorthax enclosure. Security teams rushed past the observation deck, heavily armed and moving with the precision of soldiers expecting combat. Through the viewing window, Tommy could see that the Vorthak's enclosure appeared to be intact, but the creature itself was nowhere to be seen. "Where is it?" Tommy asked, pressing his face to the glass. Dr. Vextai's voice crackled over the comm system. "The specimen appears to have accessed the maintenance tunnels through a ventilation grate. Security teams are implementing Containment Protocol 7 Alpha." Tommy's mother grabbed his arm. "We need to get to the safe room now." But Tommy pulled away, studying the enclosure more carefully. Something was wrong with the official explanation. The ventilation grate that supposedly provided the Vorthak's escape route was barely 18 inches square, far too small for the massive creature to fit through. Moreover, the grate showed no signs of damage or forced entry. "Mom, look at the grate. There's no way the Vorthak could have escaped through there." Dr. Sarah Chen examined the viewing screen more closely. "You're right. So where?" A soft sound from behind them made both humans turn. Standing in the doorway of the observation deck, having somehow bypassed all security systems and automated locks, was the Vorthak. Tommy's mother froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the emergency alarm, but Tommy stepped forward, his heart pounding but his mind surprisingly clear. "Don't move. Mom, I don't think it's here to hurt us." The massive creature stood perfectly still, its amber eyes fixed on Tommy with unmistakable intelligence. In one clawed hand, it held a small metal object that Tommy recognized as one of the geometric shapes from its enclosure. Slowly, deliberately, the Vorthak placed the object on the floor between them and took a step backward. Then it did something extraordinary. It lowered itself into a crouching position that, in any human context, would be recognized as a gesture of respect or submission. Its massive head bowed slightly and it made a soft, melodious sound that was clearly vocalization rather than the threatening growls the research team had been expecting. "It's trying to communicate," Tommy whispered. He approached the metal object the creature had placed on the floor. It was one of the geometric puzzle pieces, but the Vorthak had modified it. Using its claws with incredible precision, it had carved symbols into the metal surface, symbols that looked remarkably similar to human mathematical notation. "These are equations," Tommy breathed, recognizing familiar mathematical relationships despite the alien script. The Vorthak made another soft sound and gestured toward the object with one claw. Then it pointed to Tommy, to itself, and to the viewing window overlooking its enclosure. The message was clear. It wanted to return to its containment voluntarily, but first it wanted Tommy to understand something. Tommy picked up the modified geometric shape, studying the carved symbols more closely. As his understanding grew, his excitement mounted. "Mom, call Dad and the Admiral. Call everyone. You need to see this. Tommy, we should activate the emergency protocols." "No." Tommy's voice was urgent but not panicked. "Don't you see?" It didn't escape. It let itself out to bring us this. It wanted to show us something that it couldn't demonstrate while being watched through the glass. He held up the metal object. "These aren't just random carvings. It's showing us its understanding of physics, mathematics, maybe even engineering principles. It's trying to prove its intelligence in terms we can understand." The Vorthak remained in its respectful crouch, waiting patiently while Tommy examined its gift. When the boy looked up and nodded in understanding, the creature rose gracefully and began walking back toward the containment bay. As they followed at a respectful distance, Tommy realized that everything was about to change. The Vorthak hadn't just demonstrated intelligence. It had shown patience, planning, and most remarkably, an understanding of human psychology. It had known that Tommy would be the most likely person to understand its message, and had specifically sought him out. But more than that, it had shown mercy. A creature that could kill 47 trained soldiers in 10 minutes had voluntarily placed itself in a vulnerable position to communicate with a 12-year-old boy. It had trusted him, and Tommy was beginning to understand that this trust came with responsibilities that would extend far beyond Kepler Station. The emergency meeting that followed Tommy's declaration lasted 6 hours. Tommy wasn't allowed to attend, but he could hear raised voices echoing through the station corridors in a dozen different alien languages. His parents had been called away to defend their son's proposal, leaving Tommy alone in their quarters with strict instructions not to leave. He spent the time researching everything he could find about Vorthak biology and behavior from the station's database. Most of the information was sparse and focused on their predatory capabilities, rather than their intelligence or social structure. But buried in the appendices of several reports, Tommy found fragments that supported his theory. Vorthacs were solitary hunters, but young ones stayed with their mothers for up to 5 years. They had complex territorial behaviors that suggested memory and planning capabilities. Most interesting of all, they had been observed engaging in what researchers called play behavior, manipulating objects in their environment with no apparent survival purpose. When his parents finally returned, they looked exhausted and worried. "Well?" Tommy asked immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen sat heavily on the small couch. "Admiral Thexara approved a limited trial of your suggestions." Tommy felt a surge of excitement, but his father's expression quickly tempered it. "There are conditions," Dr. Marcus Chen continued. "Extensive safety protocols, constant monitoring, and if anything goes wrong, anything at all, the experiment stops immediately and the Vorthak will be—" He paused, glancing at his wife. "Terminated," his mother finished quietly. The weight of responsibility settled on Tommy's shoulders like a physical burden. He was 12 years old, and he'd just convinced the galactic community's top scientist to let him try to save the life of the most dangerous predator in known space. If he failed, the creature would die. If he succeeded but made a mistake, the creature would die. And if anything went wrong, it would be his fault. "There's something else," his mother added. Dr. Zefkol insisted that if this experiment fails, it will be cited as evidence that humans aren't ready for inclusion in advanced xenobiological research. It could affect our entire species' standing in the galactic community. Tommy swallowed hard. No pressure at all. The next morning, Tommy stood in the observation deck overlooking the Vorthak's enclosure, now expanded to 3 times its original size. The research team had worked through the night to implement his suggestions. Multiple feeding stations were scattered throughout the space, each containing different types of food. Several durable objects, metal spheres, geometric shapes, and even a few deactivated maintenance drones, had been placed around the environment. Most importantly, a small school of fish from the hydroponics bay had been introduced into a water feature in one corner of the enclosure. The Vorthak lay in the same position it had occupied for days, seemingly unaware of the changes around it. "Vitals are still declining," Dr. Vextai reported. "Heart rate down 12% from yesterday." Tommy pressed his hands against the viewing window, watching the massive creature's labored breathing. "How long since it's moved?" 14 hours, came the reply from Dr. Kethmoran. For the first hour, nothing changed. The Vorthak remained motionless while the assembled scientists watched with varying degrees of hope and skepticism. Tommy could feel the weight of their expectations, their doubt, and in some cases, their barely concealed hope that he would fail. Then, at exactly 0847 station time, one of the fish in the water feature jumped, creating a small splash. The Vorthak's head lifted slightly. It was such a small movement that Tommy almost missed it, but the sensors registered the change immediately. Heart rate increased by 3 beats per minute. Respiratory rate slightly elevated. For the first time in over 60 hours, the creature showed signs of interest in its environment. "There," Tommy whispered. It heard the splash. The Vorthak slowly raised its massive head, amber eyes scanning the enclosure. It took in the new feeding stations, the scattered objects, and finally settled its gaze on the water feature where the fish were swimming. For long minutes, the creature simply watched. Then, with obvious effort, it began to move. The first steps were unsteady, but as the Vorthak approached the water feature, its movements became more fluid. It crouched beside the pool, studying the fish with intense concentration. One clawed hand dipped slowly into the water. The movement was lightning fast. In less than a second, the Vorthak had snatched a fish from the water and swallowed it whole. But instead of catching all the fish immediately, it sat back and waited, watching the remaining ones swim. "It's hunting," Tommy breathed. "Impossible," Dr. Zefkol said flatly. "It's simply feeding in an inefficient manner." But Tommy could see what the others missed. The Vorthak wasn't just catching fish randomly. It was selecting specific ones, studying their patterns, playing with them. When it caught a fish, it would sometimes hold it for several seconds before consuming it, examining its prey with what could only be described as curiosity. After 20 minutes of intermittent hunting, the Vorthak moved to explore the other additions to its environment. It approached each object cautiously, testing them with gentle touches before manipulating them more boldly. The metal spheres were rolled between its claws. The geometric shapes were stacked and restacked in different configurations. When it reached the deactivated maintenance drones, something remarkable happened. The Vorthak picked up one of the small robots and turned it over in its hands, examining every surface. Then it did something that sent a shock through the observation deck. It tried to activate the drone. The creature's claws moved over the device's surface with surprising delicacy, pressing what appeared to be control surfaces and manipulating articulated joints. When nothing happened, it held the drone up to eye level and made a soft sound. The first vocalization anyone had. Heard from a Vorthak in captivity, did it? Just, Dr. Vextai began. It's trying to communicate. With the drone, Tommy said, barely believing what he was seeing. It thinks it's alive. The implications hit the research team like a physical blow. If the Vorthak was attempting communication, it suggested not just intelligence but social awareness. It recognized other entities as potentially conscious beings worthy of interaction. Over the next several hours, the Vorthak's condition improved dramatically. Its scales began to regain their lustrous black color. Its movements became more confident and graceful. Most importantly, it began to interact with its environment in increasingly complex ways. It created elaborate patterns with the geometric shapes. It developed sophisticated hunting strategies for the fish that seemed designed more for entertainment than nutrition. It even began to respond to the movements of the research team in the observation deck, tracking their positions and occasionally approaching the viewing window as if trying to get a closer look at the strange beings watching it. By evening, the transformation was undeniable. The Vorthak that had been dying of despair 12 hours earlier was now a vibrant, active, clearly intelligent creature engaging with its world in ways that challenged every assumption the galactic community had made about its species. Tommy stood at the viewing window, watching the Vorthak arrange metal spheres in what looked suspiciously like mathematical sequences. The creature looked up and their eyes met through the reinforced glass. For a moment, boy and alien predator simply regarded each other. Then the Vorthak did something that would haunt Tommy's dreams and inspire his future for years to come. It pressed one clawed hand against the glass, directly opposite Tommy's palm. The gesture was unmistakably deliberate, unmistakably intelligent, and unmistakably a recognition of Tommy as another thinking being. "My God," whispered Dr. Sarah Chen from behind her son, "it knows you saved its life." But Tommy was beginning to suspect that he hadn't saved anything. Instead, he had discovered something that would change everything humanity thought they knew about intelligence, consciousness, and their place in the galaxy. The Vorthak wasn't just a predator, it was a person. The next morning brought devastating news. Dr. Vextai's excited voice echoed through the research bay as Tommy and his parents arrived for their daily observations. "The specimen's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight," the Zephyrian announced to the assembled team. "Vitals are dropping. Scales are showing signs of molecular breakdown, and it hasn't responded to this morning's feeding attempt." Tommy pressed his face to the viewing window and felt his heart sink. The Vorthak was lying motionless on the containment bay floor, its once magnificent scales now a sickly gray color. Its breathing was shallow and labored. "How long does it have?" asked Dr. Keth Moran, the insectoid researcher who specialized in predator psychology. "At this rate of decline, perhaps 72 hours, Dr. Vextai replied grimly. "We're losing the most valuable research specimen in galactic history." Tommy's mother stepped forward. "What about changing the feeding protocol? Maybe increasing the frequency or trying different nutritional compositions?" Several alien researchers exchanged the equivalent of eye rolls across their various species. Dr. Zefkol, a tall gray being with massive black eyes, spoke in his characteristic monotone. "Dr. Chen, with respect, the feeding protocols were established by beings with centuries more experience in xenobiology than your species possesses. Perhaps," Dr. Marcus Chen said carefully, "but humans have considerable experience with predator rehabilitation on our own world." This prompted actual laughter from some of the assembled aliens. Dr. Vextai raised one of his 4 hands diplomatically. "Dr. Chen, Earth's predators are barely Class C dangers. The Vorthak is a Class X apex predator from a death world that makes your planet look like a garden paradise." Tommy watched his parents' faces tighten with the familiar frustration of being dismissed. It was the same expression they wore whenever the other researchers subtly questioned human competence or suggested that their presence on the team was more political than scientific. "What if we try live prey?" Tommy suggested quietly. The entire room fell silent. Every alien eye, sensor, and sensory organ turned toward the human boy. Dr. Kethamoran's mandibles clicked in what Tommy had learned was the insectoid equivalent of incredulous laughter. "Child, the Vorthak's natural prey includes creatures that could tear through a battalion of your species' soldiers. I don't mean Zaltharan prey," Tommy continued, feeling heat rise in his cheeks but pressing on. "I mean something from the station's ecosystem, something alive." "The boy suggests we sacrifice station personnel to feed this creature?" Dr. Zefkol's monotone somehow conveyed deep offense. "No." Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "I mean like fish from the hydroponics bay, or maybe some of the maintenance drones, or—" "Tommy," his mother said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's enough." But Dr. Vextai was looking thoughtful. "The child raises an interesting point about behavioral enrichment. We've been treating the specimen like a machine that requires fuel, not a living being with psychological needs. You cannot be seriously considering the suggestions of a human child, Doctor," Zefkol said flatly. "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "I am." Everyone turned to see Admiral Thexara, the station commander, enter the research bay. The reptilian admiral's presence immediately commanded respect from all the researchers. Her species, the Saurian Collective, were among the oldest and most respected members of the Galactic Council. "Admiral," Dr. Vexatai began, "we were just discussing—" "I heard the discussion," Admiral Thexara interrupted, her golden eyes scanning the room before settling on Tommy. "Human child, elaborate on your suggestion." Tommy swallowed nervously. He'd never spoken directly to the station commander before. "Well, ma'am, on Earth, we learned that captive predators often suffer from something called learned helplessness. When they can't hunt, can't make choices, can't engage their natural instincts, they just give up, even if they have enough food and water and shelter." The Admiral's head tilted slightly. A gesture Tommy had learned indicated interest among her species. "Continue." "The Vorthak isn't just dying from malnutrition," Tommy said, gaining confidence. "It's dying from boredom and depression. It's an apex predator that's been reduced to waiting for food to appear in a bowl. That would drive any intelligent creature insane." "Intelligent?" Dr. Kethamoran's mandibles clicked again. "The Vorthak are mindless killing machines." "Are they?" Tommy challenged. "Have any of you actually tried to communicate with it? Have you tested its problem-solving abilities? Have you given it any mental stimulation at all?" The silence that followed was telling. Admiral Thexara's voice carried a note of authority that brooked no argument. "Dr. Vextai, what protocols have been implemented for psychological evaluation of the specimen?" "Well, Admiral, the established procedures for Class X predators don't typically include—" "That's not what I asked." The Admiral's tone remained level, but there was steel beneath it. Dr. Vextai's blue skin darkened slightly. "None, Admiral. No psychological evaluation protocols have been implemented." "I see." Admiral Thexara turned back to Tommy. "Human child, what do you propose?" Tommy felt every alien eye in the room focusing on him with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and outright hostility. His parents looked terrified that their son was about to propose something that would get the entire human delegation expelled from the station. "Give it choices," Tommy said simply. "Right now, everything in its environment is controlled by us. When it eats, what it eats, when lights go on and off, everything. But intelligent creatures need to feel like they have some control over their lives." "Elaborate," the Admiral commanded. "Set up multiple feeding stations with different types of food. Let it choose when and what to eat. Give it objects to manipulate, puzzles to solve. Maybe even let it hunt some non-sentient prey in a larger enclosure. Treat it like a being with a mind instead of just a body." Dr. Zefkol's large black eyes fixed on Tommy with undisguised contempt. "Admiral, Surely you're not considering restructuring our entire research protocol based on the anthropomorphic fantasies of a human child. Tommy bristled at the dismissive tone. It's not anthropomorphic. Lots of Earth predators are intelligent. Wolves, dolphins, big cats, birds of prey. Intelligence and predation aren't mutually exclusive. Earth creatures, Dr. Kethmoran scoffed, barely evolved beyond their primordial state. Something hot and angry flared in Tommy's chest. The constant dismissal of humanity, the subtle insults, the assumption that being newer to space travel made them inferior. It all crystallized into a moment of pure determination. "You know what?" Tommy said, his voice stronger than he felt. "You're all so convinced that humans don't understand dangerous predators. But we lived with them for millions of years. We didn't have plasma shields or force fields or containment protocols. We survived by understanding them." He pointed toward the viewing window. "That creature in there? It's dying because you're treating it like a specimen instead of a living being. And when it dies, you'll have learned nothing except how to kill the most magnificent predator in the galaxy through ignorance and arrogance." The room erupted in offended chittering, clicking, and what passed for shouting among the various alien species. Tommy's parents moved protectively closer to their son, but Admiral Thexera raised one clawed hand, and silence fell immediately. Enough. Her golden eyes never left Tommy's face. "Human child, are you volunteering to implement these suggestions yourself?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tommy could feel his parents' terror, the alien's skepticism, and his own fear warring with something deeper, a stubborn human refusal to back down when something important was at stake. "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said quietly. "I am." The warning signs were everywhere on Kepler Station. Bold red letters in 17 different alien languages, all saying the same thing. "Danger. Vorthok Containment Zone. Authorized personnel only. Do not feed the specimens. 12-year-oldie. Tommy Chen had read those signs dozens of times during his 3 months on the station. His parents, Dr. Sarah Chen and Dr. Marcus Chen, were part of the xenobiology research team studying the most dangerous predator ever discovered in the galaxy. The Vorthak were nightmare creatures from the death world of Zelthera, standing 8 feet tall with obsidian scales that could deflect plasma rounds, razor-sharp claws capable of cutting through reinforced steel, and acidic saliva that could melt through most known materials. Tommy pressed his face against the reinforced viewing window of Containment Bay 7, watching the massive creature pace restlessly inside its enclosure. The Vorthak had been captured 3 weeks ago after it single-handedly destroyed an entire Galactic Council survey team. 47 trained soldiers dead in less than 10 minutes. The creature moved with fluid grace despite its size, every step calculated and predatory. "Still staring at that thing, Tommy?" He turned to see Dr. Vextai, one of the Zephyrian researchers. The tall, blue-skinned alien always seemed nervous around the human boy, though Tommy could never figure out why. Most of the alien scientists on the station treated him like a curious oddity rather than a child. "It looks hungry," Tommy observed, noting how the Vorthak's glowing amber eyes kept scanning the viewing area. Dr. Vextai's forearms gestured dismissively. "The feeding schedule is precisely calculated. These creatures are apex predators from a Class X death world. They've evolved to survive months without food if necessary. Overfeeding could trigger aggressive territorial behaviors." Tommy nodded, but something about the creature's posture bothered him. He'd grown up with animals back on Earth. His family had owned dogs, cats, even a rescued hawk that his mother had nursed back to health. There was a difference between patience and hunger, between resting and listlessness. "When was the last time it ate?" Tommy asked. 72 hours ago. "Standard protocol." Dr. Vextai's tone suggested the conversation was over, but Tommy wasn't satisfied. "What did you feed it?" "Synthesized protein blocks, vitamin supplements, and mineral additives. Everything a Vorthak requires for optimal health." The alien scientist was already walking away, clearly dismissing the human child's concerns. Tommy remained at the window, watching. The Vorthak had stopped pacing and was now lying on its side, breathing heavily. Its scales, which should have been gleaming obsidian, looked dull and slightly faded. When it moved, there was a sluggishness that hadn't been there the previous week. That evening at dinner, Tommy brought up his observations to his parents. The family ate together in their small quarters, one of the few human luxuries the station allowed. The Vorthak in Bay 7 looks sick, Tommy announced between bites of reconstituted vegetables. His mother looked up from her data pad, where she'd been reviewing research notes. Sick how? Its scales are dull, it's breathing heavily, and it moves like it's tired all the time. Plus, I think it's hungry. Dr. Sarah Chen exchanged a glance with her husband. Tommy, the feeding protocols were established by the Galactic Council's Xenobiology Committee. They've studied Vorthak biology for decades. But have they ever kept one in captivity this long? Tommy pressed. His father set down his fork, considering the question. Actually, no. Previous specimens either died within days of capture or had to be terminated due to containment breaches. This is the longest successful captivity period on record. Maybe that's the problem, Tommy suggested. Maybe the artificial food isn't enough. Maybe it needs something else. His mother's expression softened slightly. What do you mean, sweetheart? Well, back home when we fed the hawk, you said it wasn't just about nutrition. Wild animals need different things than domestic ones. They need variety, they need to hunt, they need... He struggled to find the right words. They need to feel like they're still wild even when they're not. Dr. Marcus Chen leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. That's actually not a bad observation. We've been treating the Vorthak like a laboratory specimen, but it's still a living creature with complex behavioral needs. The other researchers won't appreciate suggestions from a 12-year-old human, his wife warned. You know how they feel about our species. Tommy was well aware of the attitudes toward humans among the Galactic Council species. Humans were newcomers barely a century into space travel, while other races had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. They were seen as primitive, impulsive, and dangerously unpredictable. The fact that humans had somehow managed to survive and thrive on a death world like Earth was viewed with suspicion rather than respect. I'm not going to tell the researchers anything, Tommy said quietly. I'm just going to help. Both parents spoke at once. Tommy, no. The warning signs exist for a reason, his mother continued. That creature could kill you with a single swipe of its claw. It could kill you by breathing on you, his father added. The acidic compounds in its saliva are lethal to most species. Tommy nodded dutifully, but his mind was already working. He'd spent 3 months observing the daily routines of the research station. He knew when the shifts changed, when the corridors were empty, and most importantly, when the automated feeding systems were scheduled to operate. That night, after his parents had gone to sleep, Tommy lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. The Vorthak's amber eyes haunted him. There had been intelligence there, not just animal cunning, but something deeper. The creature knew it was dying slowly, and it was choosing dignity over desperation. Tommy had always been good at reading animals, and what he'd seen in the Vorthak's eyes was resignation. It had given up hope. The thought bothered him more than it should have. This was supposed to be humanity's chance to prove they belonged among the galactic community. His parents were part of a carefully selected team, representing the best of human scientific capability. But if they couldn't even keep their research subject healthy, what did that say about human competence? More than that, though, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was missing something important about the Vorthak. The other species saw it as a monster to be studied and contained. His parents saw it as a scientific specimen to be preserved. But Tommy saw something else entirely. He saw a living being that was slowly dying of loneliness and despair, and he was the only one who seemed to care.